So in terms of preparing for interviews, of course, I think it's important to be able to be clear and to show that direct comparison that you had of like, this is the job description, this is how I meet this criteria, and giving a specific example. During a PhD project or a master's project or a postdoc, you're going to be managing different projects at once and overcoming challenges, troubleshooting. So if you can provide those stories in your interview and show how you demonstrated those skills, I think it's very helpful. And so that's the approach that I use during my interviews, and really just practicing talking about those experiences in a succinct and clear manner.
Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today again, here live in the studio with me, Morgan Foret. And I'm super happy that you could take the time to come here today in person, here in my underground studio of Papa PhD, because we're going to have a very interesting conversation. I think your journey is quite interesting. I'm going to present you in a few moments, but I'm super happy that you could take some time to be here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's a real pleasure. So Morgan Foret has a bachelor's from the University in Calgary and a PhD in pharmacology from McGill University, where she studied Alzheimer's disease. Morgan's first industry role was at Charles River as a study director, so in preclinical studies. And her current role, her second role, is at Thermo Fisher in the regulatory department team. I don't know how it works. Different companies have different names, but so she works in the regulatory affairs as a regulatory affairs specialist there. Outside of work, Morgan enjoys playing the clarinet. This is something I knew from before the interview, with Medici McGill, the Medici McGill Orchestra. Again, thanks for being here, Morgan. I'm really curious about the clarinet because it's my instrument, although it's one that I revenge learned the clarinet at like 27 because anyway, as a kid, I was kind of gifted for music, but didn't have an opportunity to do it. And so, but it's the instrument I love. I think this is completely off topic, and I'm focusing on me. This is not the thing to do. But we're talking about the clarinet, so I'm focusing on our instrument. I think the first recording that got me kind of was I think my father had these like 45 RPM records, and it was Fiddler on the Roof, some kind of a klezmer type music, and then I even tried to learn some. Well, I had a teacher who played in a klezmer band, but I didn't get to that level. I played some like more classical stuff, and to a certain to not a very developed level, but to one that I had pleasure doing it. So I was super happy to learn. When said, "Oh, an instrument? What instrument?" It said clarinet, and I was
same one. And it's never too late to pick it up again.
Yeah. for sure.
Yeah.
And now, as I told you, I've lent it to a neighbor, a young neighbor whose clarinet had technical issues, and he knows I have it, and he asked me. So right now it's not here, but you're right. I should consider. And now my kids are getting old enough, taking some time for that. But now, we may talk about music and the importance of extracurricular activities sometime during our conversation, but it's not the focus of the conversation today. The reason I found it really interesting to have you as a guest had to do with your journey after the PhD into industry, and you're now at your second role, and even just the word industry, it has, in the minds of young scientists, it has connotations, sometimes negative connotations. It's kind of a big bad wolf type thing, or at least it's this big thing that you're going to be tiny in, and that it kind of gets people in a certain anxious state when thinking going into industry after academia. There's another rhetoric which is, but I'm going to be betraying the research or the research or my academic journey so far by and I'm doing air quotes, selling out and going into industry. And I'm saying this knowing full well that these are kind of echoes that are out there in the corridors of university. But there's nothing better to demystify those things than having someone who's there and who's having fun and who's finding challenges and great ways to use what they learned throughout their academic journey. And so this is why I'm super happy to have you here. So do you want to fill in a little bit more of color to the very quick, like 2-3 like brushstroke bio that I shared of you?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So as you mentioned, I did my undergraduate degree in cell biology at the University of Calgary. During that time, I did an academic exchange at Lund University in Sweden for a year as well, and did some undergraduate research there, also at the University of Calgary. It was research on nanoparticle interactions with lung cells. So I got to work with an atomic force microscope and really enjoyed that time in the lab. Just pursuing my curiosity for science and very interesting research projects. After my undergrad, I did an internship, an industry internship in Germany. It was 3 months, and it was in Darmstadt at Merck, and it was part of the DAAD RISE professional program. So that was a great opportunity to at least see how industry works. I will say in that role, it was more on a research role, so I was working with master's and PhD students. So I found, at least in Germany, it was much more common to have master's and PhD students within industry labs. There was a lot closer collaboration. And then I returned to Canada and moved to Montreal to pursue my PhD at McGill in pharmacology and therapeutics. And there I studied Alzheimer's disease. It was more basic science, so not clinically oriented. And I was working with a transgenic rat model of Alzheimer's disease. And for the longest time, I did believe that I would continue to pursue the academic path, was considering postdoctoral positions, imagining, that academic route. But at some point, I realized, there's a lot of opportunities in industry, and you kind of get to see those ideas and that research come to fruition and culminate in actual treatments for patients. So that was very exciting to me. And so during the PhD, just to get to understand what industry was, because as you said, it's kind of like something everyone talks about, but what is it exactly? What roles are out there? Even the title of the role can be the same in different companies, but then what you're actually doing day to day can differ a lot. So I involved myself in different student organizations to coordinate career days so that we would invite industry mentors. And this was a nice way to get to know industry in Montreal, at least. Because again, I didn't grow up here either. So it's you have to put a bit more effort to form those connections and get to know the community and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of the background before industry.
There's some interesting aspects there, because already you were in the undergrad, you had your hands in research at atomic force microscope, so clearly you had you liked being in the lab, I guess.
I
already
loved it. I love microscopes. I still love microscopes.
Yeah.
My father really is passionate about astronomy, so I grew up with telescopes and then transitioned to microscopes and
see infinitely large to infinitely small. That's very, very, very cool. And then you mentioned this this internship in Germany. Was this during the masters, or was it just?
Oh, it was in between.
It was
those
between.
after my undergraduate degree and before pursuing my PhD at McGill.
So now, and that's why I'm curious. First, I think any type of interaction with industry, or with anything that's outside university walls and outside the purview of academic research while you're in university, where you're at university, is enriching and helps you in understanding where you want to be after whichever degree you're pursuing at the moment. So kudos for you for doing that. But how did that materialize? How did you get at that point to go do an internship in Germany, you say that it's more natural there to happen in Germany, to have young scientists in industry doing internships. But was it through a program? Was it?
Yes, so it's DAAD. I forget
I think you mentioned
the.
it, but I
Oh, no
what it
worries,
was.
no worries. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's essentially like an exchange program for students in North America and in Germany, and having this exchange between the two countries. So it was DAAD Rise Professional Program, and that was for students who had just finished their undergrad or in their master's, and so they would get to do an industry internship. They also had the Rise program, which was for conducting research in an academic lab in Germany. I'm assuming the program is relatively a similar application process to what I experienced. It has been 10 years. But I know it still exists, and it was a great opportunity. It's a competitive application, but definitely worth putting in
Sure.
an application, especially for that international
That's it.
experience
Is
as
it
well.
2 in 1? Not
Yeah.
only you have you have this real like internship where you are immersed in the industry culture, but also it's in another country, so you're gonna learn. You're gonna have all of that learning. That's amazing. So I'd say, you know, I'm just taking that opportunity that you mentioned, that to say that if wherever in your academic journey, if you have an opportunity to to go on such a kind of to apply and get such type of a program of such type of opportunity, take it, because it's really priceless, and it's really tough after when you get higher degrees to say, oh, I'm a PhD and now are there programs out there for me to go intern? It's not the same. And it's really enriching, and I wonder if you, thinking about it, whether you have some one or two like key learnings you had from that experience.
Yeah, so I'd say in the lab there were other students, like academics, but all of their projects were kind of tailored to an industry setting. And then there's also certain, levels of regulation in industry labs that I got exposed to. I think they were going through an audit that year as well, so we were making sure everything was prepared. So just that rigorous nature of documentation, organization in the lab was a good experience. And also even interacting with, because there were interns who were more on the chemistry side of things, so learning about the chemistry and manufacturing and what their day-to-day looked like, because it all happened at the same site, so it was kind of cool to be in that environment, even for a short time.
No, even that's it. Even
Anything healthy.
a month, 2 months, 3 months, it's already key. And I wonder if you still keep contact with some of the people that you cross paths with at the time.
Yes, actually, it's true. I do.
But
Yeah, with some of the other interns.
there's a networking aspect there too, that when you're young like that, you may not even think about it, but it's very, very valuable for you. Plus, it allows you to, how can I say? Well, first you experience, you test, drive, the industry space, which is not easy to just go and say, oh, can I spend a couple of weeks here and see how things go? But then you now have contacts in there, which means that eventually you can look back and say, hey, I'm finished my master's, which it wasn't your case, but I finished my master's, really like my experience there. Are there any opportunities for a master's in my domain to blah, blah? There's many layers of why this was a very valuable opportunity that you had. And so I recommend, if you're watching, if you're listening, and if there's things, you receive emails about programs out there that allow you to go, I don't know, a couple of months to intern at industry, but it could be something else, could be government, could be whatever, something outside. Take it, because it's really gonna enrich you as a candidate and as a scientist. Because then you came back and you didn't then veer off into industry. You came back and you did your PhD. So how did you think that experience has an impact, or did you already know that you wanted to go for the PhD as you went into this 3-month?
Oh, it's a good question. So I think at the time I knew for sure I wanted to pursue a master's degree.
Okay, yeah.
And I was interested in having a project that was focused on studying a disease pathology and, potential treatments. And I was very interested in neuroscience. And so I was looking into labs that studied, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, something like this. And I also was drawn to the pharmacology department as well at McGill because I had the cell biology background, but I wanted to learn more about the pharmacology, the application of that knowledge. Um, and then, I started as a master's student and decided to fast track to the PhD program, and completed the project there.
Very, and it went well. That's good. That's good. Excellent. Now, the reason why you're here is because you're now at your second, industry position. Now at Thermo Fisher, initially at Charles River. There, I think is both of them, but I know Charles River is a big employer nearby, like in the Quebec area. I don't know exactly where their facilities are, but that's not important. I've just met someone else who is now finishing her undergrad and is now doing a stint at Charles River.
Nice.
Yes, yeah.
Congrats to her.
And thinking, oh, do I want to go into masters or PhD? And so I was having that conversation with her. But yeah, one of the things that I'd love to talk about with you is, given that you've had this first position and now second position, I'm sure you have learned things along the way in the process of how do I prepare for an interview, how do I also find out where I'd like to work, because there's that too, and I wonder whether there's maybe one of these two you'd like to start with, but I'd love to have that conversation of how do I, at the end of my PhD, which was focusing on doing this like scientific work that is novel and that eventually will be published, etc., how do I decide, and how do I also, often there's another question, which is how do I justify to people around me that now, after all these years of getting this degree, I actually want to go to this, again, very vague word, to industry.
So it's a very good question. I'd say the end of the PhD, it came quickly, and I realized I had to determine what the next step was, um, very quickly. And at first, I was so caught up in making the right choice or the perfect decision. Like you said, like there's all this pressure to advance your career and like show everyone what the PhD gave you and get like the perfect job afterwards. But at the end of the day, I think it was important for me to just realize on, getting my foot in the door. And there's no like right or wrong decision necessarily. It's just important to get into industry and then you'll learn more about the landscape and what opportunities are there. Um, as well, I was trying to think of an intuitive entry point because my background was all basic science and, working with a rat model. So I found it more difficult to tailor my applications for more clinically oriented positions. Um, so if you think about the opportunities that I was looking into, I was looking at medical writing, which can also span many different avenues. Like you could maybe help write abstracts or posters or PowerPoints. But in an industry setting, there's also educational medical writing. There's more technical medical writing. There's regulatory medical writing. There's many types of medical writing. I was also looking into clinical research coordinator positions, clinical research associate positions, which again are more clinically oriented. So I found probably the weaker points of my application were the fact that I didn't have that clinical background. Um, Also looking into medical science liaison positions, which do require that PhD, PharmD, or MD. They also, of course, accept master's candidates as well. Um, but that can also be challenging because if it's not necessarily your therapeutic area, it could be harder to tailor your application. What other jobs was I looking into? I don't know that I was looking into regulatory affairs as much at that point just because I didn't have a lot of experience yet. But then Charles River and like that preclinical sphere was very appealing because I had that preclinical background.
Mhm.
So the work with animals in the lab, those technical skills were directly applicable to those preclinical positions. And this is why I think that transition felt a bit more smooth. Of course, there was a big learning curve once you get into industry, but I do feel like the PhD helped prepare me for this because all those translatable skills are very useful. You know, communication skills, interpersonal skills, project management skills, time management as well is essential in industry because, I've only worked at CROs, contract research organizations. So all of our projects are for clients, and therefore we need to maintain the deadlines and produce quality work. So again, these translatable skills really help with that. And even, just during your PhD, you're always prepared for what if something goes wrong or what could go wrong and how do I mitigate risk and what is plan B? So this also really helped in that first job, I'd say.
And so your first, I was looking at the notes, and your first position when did you get straight into the clinical study director role?
Mhm. Yes, so I actually
Yeah.
how did it work?
I have a question, which is, how do you position yourself in front of these people who are going to interview you, as because you haven't had a role before, like you said, clinical work was not, you did more preclinical work, so the match was there for that, but how did you prepare in terms of what conversations did you have? Did you speak with the hiring team before, or members of the hiring team before? How did you kind of uh, find the way to, and this is a job, right? There's a job posting, which is kind of this kind of sculpture that they make, which is their perfect ideal thing. And then there's you. And then you need to kind of find a way to, like, well, we should do it like this, to kind of match the two as much as possible. Like, even if you're missing a thumb, the rest is, the rest works. Again, for those listening, I'm putting my hands in front of one in front of the other, to kind of to show this idea of matching, matching the different conditions, or anyway. Now again, there's a word missing, that is, but the different criteria that are asked, and they imagine there's one missing, but I can see that there's a match between my left hand and my right hand if they're facing each other. This was for the audio, but yeah, did you have mentors? Did you practice with someone? This practical aspect of how do you get yourself in a position to be secure enough of what you know, and secure enough of how you're going to say, okay, this skill that you're looking for, here's this that I did during my academic journey. This skill here, you mentioned project management. Here's a story that can show that, etc. Because I'm sure that that there was a certain amount of responsibility in this role, and that they were a little bit stringent when interviewing you. But I'm sure it's the feeling I get from the job title. Do you confirm, or do you have comments?
Absolutely. It's a really good question too. Because again, it's a bit intimidating to
Right.
take that first step. I will say I was very fortunate because I had a colleague who was also in working in one of the labs in my department at McGill, who was able to refer me for the position, which was very helpful and much appreciated.
Referrals are
And actually, yeah, a number of other colleagues also followed a similar path. So it somehow felt a little bit less intimidating to have that familiarity.
So you chatted with them a bunch, no?
Yes, just to get to know, what the job is like, what are the expectations, what skills are really valued. So in terms of preparing for interviews, of course, I think it's important to be able to be clear and to show those like that direct comparison that you had of like, this is the job description, this is how I meet this criteria, and giving a specific example. So, during a PhD project or a master's project or a postdoc, you're going to be managing different projects at once and overcoming challenges, troubleshooting. So if you can provide those stories in your interview and show how you demonstrated those skills, I think it's very helpful. And so that's the approach that I use during my interviews, and really just practicing talking about those experiences in a succinct and clear manner.
Mhm.
Um,
Did you do it in front of a mirror or with someone or?
Sometimes with someone, oftentimes just on my own as well, and I would, time myself as well, just to be mindful of my response time, because sometimes I can get carried away.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I've heard
But
from.
don't over practice either.
Yeah, you don't want to sound robotic, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things I've heard is funny because you mentioned about rambling or anyway going, getting lost in your in what you share. Is it's one of the critiques that I hear from like either hiring managers or whatever, is when we get into this subject that we love, we kind of lose track of time and blah 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 blah, and then you're losing their time and it's not appreciated. That's it. Yeah. Interesting. Very good. And so, is there anything else about the hiring process, that first hiring process, that like surprised you, that you liked, especially, anything that might, someone listening or someone watching might take note of and say, oh, okay, this is interesting, and this actually makes me feel more at peace that that I'm not, they're not after me to, I don't know, to see. They're not there to eliminate me as a candidate. It's a conversation. They're looking for a match. So, is there any one or two elements that maybe surprised you or that you really appreciated that you could share?
Yeah, of course. I might speak generally about the hiring process too, because I did have other interviews and other rejections and
Sure, please.
experiences along the way.
Yeah.
And even hearing from colleagues who've gone through other hiring processes, it can differ a lot depending on the job. For MSLs, I think they often do case studies and you have to present. I've had other positions where I had to give a presentation on myself and why I'm good for the role, in 10 minutes. And so I think that's a great exercise, even if you don't have to do that for an interview, because then you can kind of highlight key experiences from your academic career. Maybe you won poster awards or awards for your talks, or you fostered an interdisciplinary collaboration, which was the case during my PhD. We collaborated with a group in chemistry, and it was a lot of fun. I learned so much, and it just helped me understand how essential it is to have those different perspectives on a project and how important it is to tailor your communication to each group as well. So those sorts of things were what I highlighted in that presentation. So it's even a good exercise to do maybe on your own, just to remind yourself of all of the skills that you have and how you demonstrated them. I think for medical writing positions, sometimes you're asked to write an excerpt of something, or so test your knowledge in some way, shape, or form, and they look at how you communicate. So it is a bit intuitive sometimes with the role that you're applying for, what the interview process would be like, because if you put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager, you might think, okay, what do I want to see in this person and how can we assess that? Okay, maybe we can ask them to write something or give a case study or do a presentation
Yeah.
on themselves. So,
Yeah, I can confirm, like, my experience in medical writing, it was actually a writing test where there was reading that was given to you, and you had a set amount of time to summarize that whole reading into this many words. And then, of course, so there was this, like, how succinct you can be, how accurate you could be, attention to detail, and style also. So for sure, and it totally makes sense. One thing that I think that you mentioned, and you actually made a point of mentioning it, and I agree. So I'm going to mention it again. Have a kind of an elevator pitch of yourself. It's important throughout your professional life. And sometimes it's important to there's two aspects that are maybe less instinctive about why it's important, in my opinion. So the third aspect, which is the open one, is because in these settings of interview, etc., sometimes you'll be asked to talk about yourself, what your strengths are, whatever, and then if you've practiced it, it'll flow, and you won't have to on the fly, like do and then anyway, especially if you're an introvert, you need to practice more so it comes naturally. But the two hidden aspects of it are very often you get to the end of this journey and you haven't ever had the opportunity to do it, to talk positively about yourself. You've had probably a lot of negative self-talk about yourself. So there's this aspect of you being given this exercise, giving you the chance to actually look back and kind of make sense of what you did and pick out the most, the peaks of whichever things you think are important, and just identifying them is already very important for you, and to just increase your inner confidence. So that's one hidden one. And the other one is that sometimes you have conversations that lead to career changes that are serendipitous. And if you have this, if you're like, and it's the classic, it's the way the term, that's why we say elevator pitch, but I don't know, you're at a conference or you're at an event, a networking event, and somehow I don't know, CEO of company X is there, and you cross paths, and they want to know about you, and you're like, if you've done this work, you also are ready for those unexpected moments where things can happen and often do happen. I've heard stories like that. Thank you so much for making a point of saying it's important to do this.
And even things like, teaching assistant positions, that's also great. Any presentations that you've given, these interpersonal skills and communication skills are essential because, my first role was a client-facing role, so you want to be able to demonstrate that you can communicate professionally and clearly, in an efficient way as well, like quickly. So I think all of these skills are developed during an academic path as well. You just have to bring them to light, through your resume, through the interview.
Yeah. And you don't want to get home after an interview and then as you arrive home think, I forgot to talk about this really great story, because then, it's like gold nuggets that the moment is it's very defined in time. And so if you practice before, you'll be sure to not miss those
Yep.
high notes, those points. So very good. Now, one thing about, so you've mentioned this client-facing position. Now you're in regulatory affairs, so you're not in a client-facing position, or
No, it's a regulatory authority facing, so
okay,
it's a little bit
it
different.
was the institutional. Okay. So like the governmental agencies, like
Like Health Canada.
Canada, etc. Very. Um. So, and I'm asking because one thing you had mentioned is that there's another difference between your first position and this one, which is the first position. And this is a question that's very timely. People often don't know. So am I going to be asked to be full-time at Charles River, whatever employer? Are there, as a PhD going to the job market, are there hybrid or fully remote opportunities? And of course, we've talked before, so I know the answer, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, of course. So my first role was hybrid, and that made a lot of sense because as a preclinical study director, you do need to have hands-on impact on the project as well, because you're helping plan the project, monitor the project, finalize the project. So it's important to be on site and see that the activities are going smoothly. Similar for any like clinical position where you're doing like clinical monitoring. You got to go to the clinical trial sites to see that all the paperwork is in order. There's no protocol deviations, or if there are, they're reported. It makes sense that there's this in-person aspect. And I think it's quite valuable to have, especially as a first position after an academic career, because then with that hands-on experience, you can really see how industry works, how everything fits together. My current role is fully remote. And so I think that I was glad that I had a hybrid position at first and then transitioned to fully remote, because I think it's a lot easier to exchange knowledge and get to know your colleagues when you're in a in-person setting. And for transitioning from academia, where I think it's mostly, in person, to a hybrid position is much easier than going fully remote. Um, but remote is also very nice because, it's efficient. You don't lose any time during a commute. And I get to work with people all over the world as well. So like there's definitely pros and cons to each. So I guess I'd say to, the listeners, it's important to just consider your own lifestyle and what works best for you. And ask yourself those questions as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. So, and the opportunities are out there. So depending on the job and on the employer, the fact that you're working in like pharma related, etc., doesn't mean that it's like all remote or all. You just be ready to be open to what is offered. Read the job offers, and clearly those industries have also adapted to the new reality, which is much more plastic than it was sometimes.
It's true. And then, some positions will also require travel. So, like the medical science liaison position, of course. It depends what area you're covering, maybe how the preference of those physicians that you're meeting with. I think also, field application scientist positions. So, the individuals who go out
They cover a
and,
lot.
yeah, like educate users on different technologies or equipment that their company has. I did consider that a bit because I do love microscopy, but I didn't go down that path eventually.
I've
But
friends that do
it,
that.
yeah,
They do travel, and then if the home office is somewhere in the States, sometimes in the year they go to the home office, and but often it's like they have geographical areas that they cover, and they do cover them, and then they share the country with with other people.
and for that, like your communication and interpersonal skills are so essential, right? So again, you can leverage those skills that you built during your academic career for that position.
Now, now a question specifically about what you do today. You mentioned, so we have mentioned it. So now you work in regulatory affairs, and you mentioned that now you've kind of turned from being client facing to now being, uh, authority facing. I don't know if that was actually the term that you used, but if whichever project you're working on is regulated by Health Canada, which probably it will be, uh, you need to your stakeholders are on that side of things. But then, just the same way as industry is this kind of big word that means so many things, but that we take as a unit, very often, uh, as we hear it and react to it. Same thing with regulatory. Can you draw the curtain a little bit on what it is to work in regulatory affairs? What's the mandate, and why you're interfacing with Health Canada, and at the same time, because I think it's pertinent. So you've mentioned the term CRO, so you're not a term official working in regulatory affairs. Can you just talk to us a little bit how it is these days, to if want to evolve your career and actually transition to another position in another company? And in your specific case, how did you decide to go into regulatory affairs, which is another domain that is very kind of fuzzy for people to understand exactly what it is?
Absolutely. So, as mentioned, my first role was in the preclinical sphere, and that felt like an intuitive shift from my academic path. I will mention during my time at McGill in my last year, I took part in a clinical and regulatory affairs experience program that was hosted through DCAT at McGill. Um, Now I believe the program it's been um, changed and it's called CanTrain, and now it's Canada-wide, it's virtual. It's a program to help academics understand clinical and regulatory affairs. So that was a great opportunity, which I think helped me get that second job because I had limited regulatory experience prior to my current role. So that program was very useful because we also got good clinical practice certifications and Health Canada Division 5 certification. So I think this also helped me with that transition. I will say my first role as a study director was also very useful for my current role because in, preclinical studies, we're conducting them according to good laboratory practice. So I was, helping write new SOPs, following SOPs. You practice good documentation practice. There's a lot of regulation in the activities that parallels what happens in good clinical practice. So I think that foundation helped me transition because now I'm in regulatory affairs, but it's for clinical trials. It's not preclinical anymore. And I was interested in advancing down the drug development pipeline. I kind of like to get to know each step along the way. So I had the preclinical experience, and now I'm at that transition between preclinical studies and clinical trials and understanding how that works because all the clients that we had in the preclinical stages were working towards their clinical trial applications to Health Canada or for the EU regulatory body, or for the FDA, it's the Investigational New Drug Application, IND. So they were all working towards these applications, and I thought, okay, how do these applications work? What are they looking for in the applications? How does one compile it and submit it? So I was very interested in this, and that's why I was drawn to this regulatory affairs specialist position so I could learn more about that process. And I do think the clinical and regulatory affairs position, or experience at McGill helped with that. I will maybe give a very quick tip before I discuss the CRO part, because one aspect that I always struggled with when I wanted to move into a new role or try something different that I had some relevant experience with, but not direct experience, right? I wasn't a regulatory affairs specialist before becoming one.
That's it.
So, and I was always wondering how our CVs or resumes are scanned in an automated manner, and the fact that you need keywords. So, I thought, okay, well, I didn't hold the title of regulatory affairs specialist before. So my strategy was, at the start of my CV to put, aspiring job title, eager to do XYZ. Because it's honest, like I really am eager to step into this position. But this way, I also can put that text there just in case it gets filtered out. Again, I don't really know how that automated process works. All I know is that keywords are important, and maybe if it helps that I can put the job title on my resume in this honest manner, it could help.
I think it's good to the point that it transmits your very deep desire to get to a position. I've talked with people who work in HR, who headhunters, etc., and there's a bit of an exaggeration, and I think the AI came and made it even more exaggerated. That how much automation
Very different, than when I was applying.
So, and especially at that level, there's humans looking at your CVs. But look, Taylor, if you try to make the CV as good as you can, and if in your explorations that's one of the things that you find, do it. It doesn't cost anything to anyone, and it's as long as it rings true to what you want and what you believe, you can put it in there, and it's in the way you mentioned having written it, it's true. Aspiring, it's it's there. But I think at the level of you've done a PhD and now you're trying to get hired in an organization, from what I've been told from people who work hiring people, you're not going through automated. You're not eliminated, at least by a machine. It'll be.
This is reassuring. Yeah,
But
is reassuring.
I'm saying this,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna have. So this person I'm talking about is hard to get in terms of having time to come for an interview, but I am going to interview them, and then then it'll be from the horse's mouth. You'll hear what he has to say.
Exciting. Yeah. Because that whole process is very unknown.
Yeah. Nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Yes. So that was the tip I just wanted to give. And so, both of my roles, they've been at contract research organizations. So in this case, our projects are for clients. So I've really enjoyed this experience because you get to work with a broad variety of projects and clients, seeing so many different indications, routes of administration. It's a really fruitful experience that I've enjoyed. But I'd say to the listeners, it's also important to consider, okay, do I want to work at a CRO? Do I want to work at a pharma company? Do I want to work at a smaller company or a larger one? Because it can definitely um, change your experience a bit as well. But so far, I've worked at relatively large CROs and have enjoyed the time and the learning experiences that have been available to me. And just the breadth of projects that we get to work with, I think is exciting.
Yeah. And I'm going to just dig a little bit deeper because you said something, and I think it may still not be clear for the people watching or listening. When you say our projects are for the clients, let me see if I understood well from our previous conversations. A pharma company needs a study done, but they can't do it in their facilities. They're going to contract a contract research organization or CRO to then do this clinical study, be it stage 1, stage 2, whatever. Okay, so it means that you are professionals at leading preclinical or clinical studies. You have facilities. You have the men, the how do you say, the manpower to do it. And then they say, okay, I need, there's this new drug. We need to do this phase 2, blah, blah, blah study. And the CRO does that. Did I understand
Exactly.
well?
So in the preclinical setting, we would assist with the study protocol, conduct the study itself, the in-life monitoring, finalize it, have that final, good laboratory practice report, which then gets used in that IND application, or down the line, maybe in the new drug submission application, which is it's after the clinical trials. And then for a clinical CRO, they're running the clinical trials in this case. And so you have that final report as well, and all that clinical data that, again, would go towards that next stage in the drug development process. So that new drug submission, or in Canada, new drug submission, in the US, new drug application.
Okay. With the FDA.
Yeah.
Okay. Very excellent. Thank you for clarifying that, because again, it's a CRO is an acronym that I've heard a lot. And then of course, but you're within it all day. People don't think so much of explaining exactly what it means. But it's really interesting, and it's interesting, and it totally makes sense why they would hire people with a PhD, with the research background, because that's what you're going to do. Although in the different setting, different timelines, the whole industry culture versus the academic culture. But like you said, there's a learning curve. And I think part of it is that, right? Learning the culture. Those first few months at Charles River must have been a lot of learning or de-learning some habits from more the academic way of doing things into the way of doing things for, let's say, pharma clients, etc., which have very, definite, like you said, deadlines because they have deadlines for the FDA, whatever.
The deadlines are very important.
Yeah.
And time management is very important. Also, I think even just having an awareness of the different industry guidelines that are out there. So I will mention, for that transition from academia to industry, it is helpful to be aware of industry guidelines and regulations that are out there. So there's the ICH guidelines, the International Conference on Harmonization. And so it's intuitive, because if you think there's clinical trials and not preclinical trials going around all over the world, how do you standardize that? So there's a lot of guidelines there. They have quality guidelines, so that's for good manufacturing practice, so how the drug is formulated. They have safety guidelines, so good laboratory practice, that's the preclinical studies. They have good clinical practice, which is the clinical studies. So, and that's for the efficacy guidelines. So I encourage people to peruse those guidelines, just to get a sense of what's required of these studies, what health authorities are looking for. Aside from that, I also would say there's a lot of useful information online for the regulatory bodies. So, I mean, Health Canada, the FDA, they have all their regulations there. So for me to transition from preclinical studies to regulatory, I definitely utilize the resources at hand on the Health Canada website. Like, there's guidances for sponsors who want to start a clinical trial in Canada, and it's all laid out there. not all the details are there. Sometimes like there's a few gaps, but it gives you a good idea of what is needed. Essentially it's like obviously a clinical trial protocol, informed consent forms, the chemistry manufacturing document, investigator's brochure, which has preclinical data, clinical data, all that background. Many other documents, of course, but definitely utilize the resources on hand. And I'm sure there's courses out there as well, but I would say, there's also a lot of free resources. And as someone who recently graduated, I understand like there's financial constraints as well. So it's important to leverage those resources. So ICH guidelines, also Alcoa, I would say. So that's for like good documentation practice. In industry, if it isn't documented, it did not happen. At academia, it's like, oh, I'll write in my lab book tomorrow, it's fine. In industry, no, you have to write it down in the moments. You cannot write it the next day because every annotation needs to have a date next to it, right? So Alcoa, I encourage the listeners to like research Alcoa and what that means for like good documentation practice. So these are some of the things that I think you can also learn ahead of time to help smoothen that transition to industry.
Thank you for that. Now we're getting to the end of the interview, and before I ask you kind of a final question, you had mentioned to me that you had some entities you wanted to to promote, also some events that you like to talk about. I'd like you to give I would like to give you the chance of doing that right now. Also, to tell people who are out there what's the best way to reach out to you if they want to, keep the conversation going, but with you. I guess on LinkedIn would be
Yes, LinkedIn's perfect. Feel free to reach out. And if I'm ever late to reply, please feel free to send a friendly reminder message. Things get busy sometimes, so I appreciate patience, but I'm always happy to help out in any way I can.
So, tell us, what would you want to share with the audience that this is close to your heart, and that now's the moment to do it.
Yeah, of course. So I think there's a few organizations, at least in the Montreal area, that also helped me throughout my career trajectory. There's Women in Bio, which I've attended their events for many years, and it was a great way to network with people in the Montreal community and industry. And it was a very nice, safe space, very encouraging space. I also recently joined Women Leaders in Pharma and the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, and they also host fantastic events that are great for networking in industry. And they have some very nice topics that they cover. And finally, for those interested in regulatory affairs, we have the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. And so just last year, the local networking group in Quebec opened up a RAPS networking group here. So it's our RAPS Quebec LNG. I'm a part of the council, and so just wanted to put a little plug to let everyone know that our Quebec group exists, and we host a number of different webinars and networking events if you're interested in regulatory affairs. We do have an event next week. I don't know that the podcast will be published in time, but even for those listeners, just to be aware, it's June 4th with a Health Canada speaker on pharmacovigilance. And if you can't make it to that one, we'll have many more in the future as well. And these communities within Montreal have really helped me advance in my career and find the confidence in myself and understand the industry landscape as well. I know there's also like Alumni Association, through McGill, the McGill Women's Alumni Association, and others. So I guess I just encourage the viewers to look at the resources that you have on hand and the communities that are out there, because they do exist. And
you don't have to go through this alone. Exactly, you don't have to go through this alone. And very often you do it because you think that's the default. Like you've been doing your PhD alone in a certain way, and now you need to do it alone. You don't have to go it alone. Thanks for sharing all of those. It's a lot of resources. And what I'll ask you is, let's on LinkedIn, I'm going to be sure to follow Raps and because the episode's not going to be out. But if I'm following them, I'll repost or something.
Thank you. Yes, this would be great.
But all of the organizations you mentioned, I'll share links if you send them to me. I'm asking you to
Well,
send them to
thank
me.
you so much.
I'll put them in the show notes of the episodes for sure. Now, Morgan, as kind of a last question, you shared with us your journey. You had this early kind of taste of research, microscopes. Then you had this, I would say, very enriching, and not anyway, and no, unbeknownst to me until today, opportunity to go abroad after your bachelor's to then be in industry a few months in another country. It's like layers of, it's good, and it's good for you it was good for you at the time as a young researcher or as a young scientist in different ways. But each person's journey is their own. But people who are out there, one of the things that uh, I'd love to, how can I say, minimize is the lack of preparation for the moment, when the moment comes to transition. And the moment will come. And transition could be, it can be transition to your postdoc, because you also need to kind of,
Yep.
navigate that and compete, et cetera, et cetera. But the toughest transition, let's say, is outside academia for different reasons. And for someone who's kind of really, has their head in the research and is probably putting putting it in the back burner, or putting to a second degree of importance, preparing their career path for after. I wonder if you have a word of inspiration based on your experience, based maybe also on, because you said that you were helped by people you knew who were like 1 year ahead of you, and I wonder whether you have a few words of inspiration to them, inspiration to look up a little bit and prepare a little bit in advance. Because I feel you've also, it feels to me that with all you've said, you've always somehow been preparing in advance for what was coming next. You didn't let yourself get caught by surprise with a transition and then feeling, oh, now I'm kind of suspended in the air, not knowing what to do.
Right. No, it's a really good question. So I'd say attending networking events is a great way to do it. And if you can't find any for some reason, there should be some out there. You could organize your own event. So this is usually what I did in in grad school. There's a student group at McGill. They're the PCSN, Pharmaceutical Career Student Network. So I was a part of that group, and it's still ongoing. They still organize great events, which I attend occasionally. So this was a great way to meet industry mentors. And I think it's important to get yourself out there. I know it can feel intimidating. If you don't organize the event, you can at least attend. Like you said, also look around you at your colleagues, those who have graduated a year or two ahead of you. I have a number of friends who work at Health Canada now and other companies, even friends who I worked or who I was with on exchange in Sweden. They're at Roche, they're at, many other places, right? And even if it's not, you don't necessarily need to get like a job from them or something, but even just to talk to them and ask, hey, what is your day-to-day like? What do you like about work? How does the industry landscape work to you? So I guess what I'd say is the preparation doesn't have to feel too formal either, because I find when things feel a bit too formal, there's a lot of pressure and it can be more intimidating.
Like
So just taking a step,
like the over preparing, almost having a script. It's kind of in the same ballpark.
like be guided by curiosity,
Exactly.
like in science. You have this question, oh, like what's this job like? Go ask someone about
That's
it.
it. Let yourself be helped by your organic network, instead of thinking, oh, now I need to go get a suit or a skirt, whatever, to go to a networking event where I need to have a certain look. And that's not those exist, but we're not talking about that or just about that. And I love that you said that you can organize it. If it doesn't exist around you, you can organize this through. And
especially as a student, it's a lot easier to organize those events. You have the venue, it's just already integrated into the institution that you're at. So
And if you reach, and I've said this already, and I'll say it again and again, if you say, oh, we're a group of students of this university, and we've seen that you're an alumni and an alumnus, and would be interested in inviting you to that, people will say yes. People will say yeah. Not everyone, but people appreciate so much the chance of coming back, and you've probably had this experience, and giving back to the community they came from. So that's another aspect of being a student that's interesting in this context of organizing, networking, or these kind of alumni conversation type things. Sure.
yeah, no, it's a great community. And like you said, everyone's very generous and happy to share their experience. Even sometimes on LinkedIn, I'll see that, a past experience like a University of Calgary alumni or McGill alumni, something in connection. And then I use that to sort of start the conversation. Or maybe we both did research on Alzheimer's, and then to start the conversation, just
finding a point of commonality, and that's it. That's the way to kind of open the door to having a conversation with someone you probably don't know, but that now you have actually a reason to just have that first, hey, hey, I'm here. We have this point in common. I'd love to chat. Awesome. Morgan, thank you so much for all you shared. Wishing you all the best for your career. I think it looks like you're doing the right things, and this doubly makes me happy of having invited you, because you're sharing the right advice, at least in my point of view. But not only advice, just also sharing your story, letting people hear different narratives, different ways how to think, because people get to a position like yours in different ways. It's kind of a snapshot type thing.
And I'm still learning.
And
I'm still learning.
But you, and that's also an important message, which is you don't stop being human and young and green just because now you have a title. You become a different tone of green, because if you want to keep evolving, you'll always need to be learning. So I think it's a great message to give to. So thank you, and thank you for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you again so much. And I hope it was helpful to the listener.
I am sure it's going.
I encourage them to reach out anytime if I missed any points or they have questions.
Very good. So she said it. I'll share the links in the show notes. Thank you for watching.